Welcome to this week's episode.
Yep.
Since we're the only ones here, I'm Paula Williams.
I'm John Williams.
And we are ABCI, and ABCI's mission is
to help all you folks out there in the aviation world sell more of your products and services.
Absolutely. So today we are talking about Adam Grant's book, Think Again. Do you have the book there, John?
In fact,
I did. Cool. So what did you think of it? First impressions?
Well, it's very readable and entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
But I at least didn't see a whole lot of new stuff. But depends on how long you've been in the game of doing what he talks about as to whether you've experienced a lot of that stuff or not.
Right.
If you've been in business a long time, you've probably experienced all of it to one degree or another.
Yeah.
If you've been in business for 5 years or a year and a half or 3 out of an MBA or whatever, or even out of an undergrad degree, you probably are going to say, wow, really?
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's funny is you don't even have to be in business to use what he's talking about because, parents, anybody who's been dealing with people for more than a year has run into a lot of these kinds of situations. I kind of went into it with a prejudice because this is a Harvard guy, from the Wharton School of Business. And I'm thinking, well, that can't be any good. Know what I mean?
Yeah, well.
I mean, I thought it would be a lot more pretentious and scholarly and heavy and hard to read than it was. So, I was actually pleasantly surprised with some of the guy's a great storyteller. So that's a good thing.
Right. Yeah. Not too bad a writer either.
Mm-hmm. Right. So one of my favorite stories from the beginning of the book was talking about the Blackberry. And you think about those of us who are old enough to have had Blackberries. They were the neatest thing since sliced bread. We all kind of developed this thumb keyboarding skill and everything else. And it was a big part of, it was a life-changing thing to have a Blackberry because you didn't have to be in the office to respond to email. And that was such a culture shift for most of us who grew up, sitting in an office from 9 to 5. And then all of a sudden we didn't have to, right?
Yep, that's true.
Right.
I had to turn down my headset.
Okay.
On one side. Yeah, because that actually started before the iPhone took off.
Yeah, that is for sure. So,
and just propelled the iPhone into amazing heights.
Exactly. And what's funny is that the people that built the Blackberry, it was a revolutionary idea. It was fantastic. So, Mike Lazaridis, I hope I'm saying that right. He's the guy that invented the Blackberry, and it was undeniably fantastic. It was a resounding success. So Bill Gates had one. President Obama famously had one. The Secret Service didn't know what to do with it. A lot of people, a lot of very successful people were saying they couldn't live without their Blackberries, and they were talking about their Blackberries on the news. It was like it brought it into being socially acceptable to have one of these things, and it was, if you're anybody in business, you have a Blackberry. And I know John and I.
How many of those people said they couldn't live without a Blackberry died when it did?
Well, something better came along. And that's the thing, is that Mike Lazaridis didn't believe that these new phones, he figured, the iPhone and all of the other competitors were toys because they didn't have keyboards. They couldn't possibly be serious. They let you play games and other things like that. People's bosses aren't going to pay for an iPhone, right? And people themselves don't have the money to pay that kind of money for an iPhone because, that sort of thing had never existed before. So all of the evidence was kind of on his side, that the Blackberry is going to be around forever, and nothing's ever going to change that. But it did.
I wonder if he had any input from any of his engineers that we needed to change anything.
Oh yeah, they were fighting with them tooth and nail and so on. But 2007, the iPhone was released, or a new iPhone was released, and the conception was it was a toy. It was not as serious as a BlackBerry. Serious people have Blackberries. People who want to play games and be fun have iPhones. People with more money than sense have iPhones. But that has changed over time, and nobody has a BlackBerry anymore. I don't think you could even buy one if you wanted to, and put it on
maybe on eBay.
Right? Could you even get service for one? I don't know. But yeah, exactly. But things change really, really fast, especially in this day and age. And something that made someone successful even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, has changed. You think about some of the social media like Snapchat and other things that were the biggest thing ever, and they are not anymore. So you got to keep your ear to the ground and keep changing your mind, right?
Yep.
Right. One of the other things that I really liked was, he talks about there are 3 roles that people play in a conversation. Well, actually, there are 4, but 3 of them they use the most often. If you're overhear a conversation in a restaurant or anywhere else, you can pretty much figure out which role people are playing in a conversation. They're either being a preacher, a prosecutor, or a politician.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. That was good.
Yeah. So, a preacher is trying to convert someone over to their way of thinking, whatever it is. Either we need a stop sign on this corner, or, whatever that is. And they're doing there was a Neil Diamond song, Brother Loves Salvation show, yeah. Where they're just being as charismatic and convincing as they possibly can be about whatever it is that they're trying to convince people of. That was a great song and a great story too. And then prosecutors, of course, are debating, rather than just using charisma and emotion and everything else. They are being debaters, just like we did in high school, where you have a legal pad and you write down every single argument that they make, and you cross that one out, and you cross that one out, and and you refute every point with evidence. And there is a time and a place for that, but some people are really good at it.
Yeah, but what really blows people away when they're into that role is when you come across and say, well, okay, well, what do you think about that? Rather than telling them how they're supposed to think about it. So you're telling me that there's no value in this particular issue? Okay, tell me what you're thinking.
Exactly.
And then you get somebody else and say, well, there's always more than one person, except on a debate program. There's always more than one person involved, or 2 people.
And more than one point, because almost nothing in this world is black and white. There's always good reasons and, complications to almost any story. So, and that's what he says, is by, introducing that 4th role, which is the scientist, where you go into it with curiosity, as if you were visiting from another planet and you're trying to find out why people think the way they do. Well, tell me more about why you think we should have a stop sign on this corner. Tell me more about your thinking. Is it to save lives? Is it to slow people down? Is it to complicate? What's your reasoning, and how can we get to the bottom of that? And I love the action items at the end of the book, where he's talking about how to go about getting from a complete clash of ideas. And some of the ideas are basically, you go in with curiosity, you ask questions, you find out as much as you can about where they're coming from. And there is undoubtedly some point, even on the most contentious issues, where there's agreement, and starting from that and saying, okay, well, you know what? We all care about the safety of the children in our community.
Well, even if there's not agreement, there's less animosity on some points than, than
than
others.
others. That's true. I don't know. I think almost any point, if you are a human being, you're going to find some reason that you agree with another human being. Um, you may have to go pretty far afield of the issue at hand, but if you can start there and take the time, um, this is nothing but, and of course, I always compare everything to Stephen Covey, right? Um, Seek first to understand, listen first before you jump in and propose a solution because maybe you don't understand the problem. Having some humility and some curiosity about the conversation. And I am not the best person at this. I'm sure you probably could could attest to that. But having some curiosity and some humility is going to go a long way. And I think this is, we're going to start including some of this material and some of these action items in some of our sales courses because it's great, and it's very systematized the way he goes through. Here are some of the things that you can do to de-escalate the situation before you propose a solution. So, even if he goes in with somebody who's totally resistant to what you have in mind, you can at least leave friends, if not leave with getting your way, right?
And that's all based on one-on-one. But if you have more than one person and you're trying to lead this group, as in team approach, he talks about high performing and low performing teams, and having led both, there are ways in which you can take a low performing team and make it high.
Right.
And you know that because I've seen you do this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and we didn't have this book at that time, but we were kind of following some of the principles, basically showing up with some curiosity and some humility. We interviewed everybody, found out what their hot buttons were, what their issues were. We didn't pretend to know everything. I know, with the team that you went into, you said, hey, I know nothing about how to accomplish this project. You guys have the knowledge. Let's put a plan together, and this is the objective. How do we go about doing that and getting everybody's information in a safe environment so they're not going to be jumped on for having a wrong idea or getting something out of order? You just had a process for getting that to work.
That's just standard cadence project methodology. That just a lot of people don't, well, they may know how, but they are unable, unwilling, or whatever to use the stated approach. And if you do, things work out amazingly well.
Yeah. Well, and the stated approach is basically you have a mission or an objective. We need to do X by this date within this budget. You have a schedule, a budget, and an objective. And other than that, it's bottom up. How do we get there from here? And you're not telling them how, they're telling you how, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think organizations are getting more to that point, since especially now, that the market has changed so that employees have to feel like they are contributing to something. They're not just doing what they're told. Nobody does what they're told anymore. They all want to own their jobs. They all want to own the method of getting to the objective.
I think you need to say that a little more assertively, and not feel like they are. They have to know they are contributing.
Yeah. And they have to have the control of the process. If they want to do work at 4:00 in the morning and then take off at 3:00 in the afternoon to do a doctor's appointment or whatever, if it accomplishes the objective and I'm the manager, I don't care if their desk is empty at 3:00 in the afternoon. It's
I can still remember when I worked for a large U.S. corporation.
That will remain nameless.
Yeah. Well, the guy came and said, I need you to put a project plan together for me with this. And he wanted me to do it.
Yeah.
And he walked out of the room, and I went back in his office and said, I don't know how to do this. I'm not smart enough. Are you?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's what I want you to do. I said, well, I can't do it by myself. I have to have people help me.
Mm-hmm.
He said, get whoever you want. And then I took the entire tech support staff.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to me at the time, did something similar to the cadence methodology approach and got a plan together.
Right.
One that
Exactly.
actually worked as close to perfectly as you can imagine. And we'll just stop right there because it did work so well. It had a lot of political ramifications that weren't necessarily all good. But anyway.
Yeah. And that's true. I mean, there is always risk in any decision that you make, even in not making a decision.
Oh, yeah.
So, one of the concepts that I really like is the totalitarian ego. There are some folks especially in business from 10, 20 years ago, that were very successful because they had a totalitarian ego. Nothing could, they knew exactly what was going on, and nobody had any ideas that could possibly approach anything that was proposed that contradicted this key set of ideas, and such as the Blackberry guy. If anybody proposed something like people don't want keyboards anymore on their phone, that would not be even considered in this organization. And there's another example he gives of NASA, where prior to the O-ring incident, the Challenger disaster, anybody who suggested that a launch not occur as scheduled would be looked at with quite a bit of cultural
animosity.
Exactly. How dare you suggest that we put off this launch? And the burden of proof was then on that person, who was then subjected to a microscope. They had to prove why they believed what they believed. And, that was the mindset, was, the totalitarian ego of NASA was, we're going to be on schedule. After that happened, after the Challenger disaster, they brought in, and they tell the story about this. It's actually a really good story. It became, the burden of proof was on the launch team. So anybody could say, I don't think this is safe because X, Y, or Z. And then the burden of proof was on the launch team to prove that is not a factor, or that is not a problem, or this is going to be safe, in spite of that new information. And just the flipping on its head, so that a bottom-up idea had fiat over what the organization said, changed NASA entirely. And you could argue it was too little, too late, maybe in NASA's case. But in the case of an organization, I think you really want to have anybody able to pull the cord at any time and say, you know what, we need to think about this, because this is going to be a problem. And like in our organization, we have John Quaffle, he's our web guy and our technology guy. And he comes up with a lot of really new information that I am not necessarily going to jump on board with the first time I hear it, because it's just like, no, this has been successful for us for forever. So let's not change anything unless we have to. But a lot of the time he's right. So, that's why we pay for those ideas. I mean, we have somebody whose job it is to prove me wrong.
You don't want to be in charge of Blackberry.
Right? Exactly. And we're changing the way we do things in a lot of cases. Even things that have been successful in the past, we need to rethink that and go, you know what, technology's changing, the market's changing, the security environment of the internet is changing. All of these things are evolving all the time, and we have to rethink our premises, and somebody has to pull the cord and say, you know what, we need to do this different. And I need to go, maybe, and at least be willing to consider that, right? Not an easy job that John has, so, or the other John. So
even more true in the security and the IT and slash security world.
Mm-hmm.
That's changing daily,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes hourly.
Yeah, that is for sure. I love the example that they give of in Quebec, there was an outbreak of measles. And this is long past the time when measles should even exist, right? And the reason was because there was a kind of a cultural bias against the measles vaccine, and they had one. And I'm not sure exactly even what his profession was, if he was a social worker or what his role exactly was. But he had an unprecedented record of getting parents to vaccinate their children. And he didn't do it by presenting information, because the parents, rightly or wrongly or otherwise, felt like they were being talked down to by the establishment that they didn't trust for whatever reason, some of which were very legitimate reasons. And presenting more data, they would say, the data is flawed, or this is made up, or this doesn't apply to me, or whatever. I mean, facts can always be refuted. So this guy, his approach was completely different. So, what he would do is go in and talk to somebody and ask them open-ended questions, So tell me about your kids, tell me about the health problems that they've had so far. Tell me about the experiences that you've had with their doctors so far. So, tell me why you don't trust your doctor, tell me who you might trust. What information sources are credible to you? And he would listen reflectively. He would basically drill down on some of the questions that would lead in the direction of, what exactly is the problem here? And then eventually people would come to the conclusion, you know what? I guess I do have enough information to make this decision. And I guess I am coming to the wrong conclusion reflexively, and they would get their kids vaccinated. And measles in Quebec is now not as bad of a problem as it was 10 years ago. So, can you change the way people think when they're so deeply entrenched? And John and I, you and I have had this conversation a lot. What the heck do you do when somebody just digs in deeper when they're presented with information?
Yeah.
And this is the first real answer I have seen that actually worked in a real world situation. So I think that's pretty cool.
This reminds me of the joke we saw on the billboard, right? 70% of the earth is covered. And what was it?
Non-carbonated water.
Non-carbonated water. Okay, which is a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And then the punchline is, does that mean the earth's flat?
Well, it certainly isn't sparkling. So in a manner of speaking, they're right, the flat earthers and things. So, and, this I think is really timely, given where we're coming into things, where people are so polarized. And, I'm not going to jump into a political conversation, but sometimes it happens. You find yourself talking about things like, I had somebody email me about our Disney event, and say, I don't think you should be doing a Disney event. And I'm like, okay. With that logic, we shouldn't be doing events in Las Vegas either, because they have a history with the mob. If you wanted to only do business with companies that you are absolutely positively, philosophically, and otherwise aligned with, I would never have worked for Wells Fargo, at least for as long as I did, because
you wouldn't buy a General Motors car, you wouldn't buy a Ford, you wouldn't. All these companies, in one way or another, have something that you would find negative, so you would never participate in the economy.
Exactly. So, I totally, totally, totally respect this person's opinion, and I am not going to try and change it, but I'm also not going to be talked out of an event that we had planned years ago because of some political thing that's happening now, unless they were actually eating babies or something like that, and maybe we consider it. But, I mean, seriously, there are so many factors on either side of any situation. And, I'm not going to try and convince somebody that their point of view is wrong. I'm just going to stick to my guns and do what I do. And if I need to convince somebody of something, I'm going to try and do it using these methods because I think they're good.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, I totally love the book. I'm going to highly recommend it, I think, to anybody, especially anybody in sales. And, I think it's right up there with the Bill Caskey book is one of the top 2 of the year so far. What do you think?
Yeah, it's pretty good actually. And it's amazing is as readable as it is based on a Harvard graduate doing it.
I know, heaven forbid. See, there we are with our preconceived notions of Harvard people are pretentious.
When I went to college, my what was it? English, they had Composition 101. Had a brand new guy from Harvard. I mean, just graduated, walked in, disheveled looking, long hair, unkempt. And then they didn't mess around. He said, well, you're going to be writing 3 papers a day and take one home. And when you get back, and I just, when somebody says they graduated from Harvard, that's what I think about.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I recognize anyway, that I have preconceived notions about people and Harvard people, and so on. And that's true. I mean, we're encouraged, I think, from the get-go. Our culture really encourages people to, you start asking people as soon as they're born, what are you going to be when you grow up? And you expect people to stick to their guns, and you expect people to never change their mind. And that is supposed to be a virtue. Well,
I've modified my answer to that. What are you going to do when you grow up? Well, the proper answer is, I don't want to grow up.
Right. So exactly.
Now, what am I going to do next? Who knows?
Right. And, kids that are running around today on the playgrounds are going to be doing things that we can't conceive of right now. So, getting them into the mindset of being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever and stuff like that, and he gives the example of his cousin who was kind of railroaded into being a doctor, which he wanted to do when he was a kid, but then found out this, the more he found out about it, the more he's like, this is not the life that I had envisioned for myself. This is not what I had hoped for. This is not, and then he ended up making some midstream decisions after wasting a lot of time and money meeting everybody's expectations, including his own, that had been set in concrete way too early. So you want to keep your options open, you want to keep your kids' options open. All of those things are not a bad thing. And so it's a nice counter to our cultural bias of consistency and stick to your guns and keep your eye on the ball and all of those other virtues that are great until they're not, right?
and those are all good interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
When you're at a level like you're talking about, where you're trying to determine on day one what you're going to do for the rest of your life, it doesn't apply. Yeah.
And we do, our 10-year plans, our 50-year plans, but we know that those are going to be super flexible because there's so much we don't know.
And we redo them every year, so they change.
They evolve, right? They are not set in stone. We do write them in ink, but then we replace the page. Maybe we should write them in pencil, but the paper would disintegrate with the amount of erasing we do. So that's a good reason to do that. Maybe we'll start thinking about whiteboards, but I still like paper. Gives it a little bit of permanence, and something can be permanent for 6 months and then not be. That was true at the time I said that.
Yeah. Famous Paula quote.
That was true at the time I said that. But now, and we update our blog posts all the time, and say, yeah, in 2000 we were advising this, now we're not, and so on. So anyway, famous last words?
Say again?
Any famous last words about the book or anything else?
Nope. I suggest you read it because I think the title is Think Again. And we absolutely need to do that repetitively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that should be an iterative process in our lives.
Iterative process, yes.
Right. Okay. Well, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
You bet. Stay safe.